In 1865, in the aftermath of the Civil War, a battle-weary nation put aside their weapons and their enmity and searched for ways to heal the terrible wounds inflicted by 4 years of strife. Many stayed put with a mind to rebuild the war-torn cities and farms of the East. But some had another idea.
Mr. Fury, sir?
Yes?
I'm the Reverend Milsher, Louis Milsher, that is. And this is my wife, Lavinia.
Reverend, ma'am, pleased to make your acquaintance. What can I do for you folks?
I have been voted spokesman for our group, Mr. Fury. We are only 8 wagons and a small gather of livestock, but I am certain that we can attract a few more fellow pilgrims when it's known that we have procured the great Jedediah Fury as our wagon master.
Where are you folks planning on ending up?
Why, California, sir.
Kansas City, Missouri, the great jumping-off place for legions of pioneers looking for a new start in the vast, untamed West. Among the special breed of men known as wagon masters, none is more renowned than Jedediah Fury. He and his son Jason have more experience leading wagon trains than just about anybody. But some fellow pilgrims are more trouble than others, as Jason discovers on a trip into town.
Let me alone, you big bully! Stop it!
Quit your whining, you little sissy!
As he made his way along the street, he heard voices from down an alley at his left. He stopped and looked, and there in the shadows saw a fist fight in progress.
Hey, there, you! Let him go.
The bigger fellow, one hand on the smaller's collar, turned his head toward Jason and smiled. It was a very unwholesome smile.
Get lost!
He slugged the smaller boy again. The smaller boy lost consciousness and slipped to the ground.
And just what business is it of yours, Mr. Fancy Pants? Get out. Go on home. Just who the hell do you think you are, anyhow?
I'm someone who doesn't like to see murder committed for no reason but sport.
The bully appeared taken aback and said nothing for a moment, giving Jason the time to notice the initials MM embroidered on one point of his collar, and that he also wore not just one gun, but 2.
Go on. Don't be stupid.
Stupid.
He suddenly ran toward Jason. Jason sidestepped him at the last moment, and the bully's momentum took him out into the street and right into a mud puddle.
God damn it, son of a bitch!
While the bully was picking himself up, Jason went to his victim and helped him to his feet.
Thank you. Be careful. That's Matt McDonald.
The bully was bearing down on Jason again, although he was slightly impeded by the mud soaking his pants and shirt, and the fact that he'd stepped into a bucket and it was stuck on one foot. He'd also lost one gun. His first wild swing caught Jason square in the chest and sent him stumbling backward into a stack of crates. But Jason rolled and came up on his feet fast. The bully was caught off guard. Jason clipped him on the side of the head. Matt staggered. A sharp uppercut laid the bully out flat, with his foot still stuck in that bucket.
Gosh.
Duck your head in that rain barrel water. You got blood on your face. You don't want to scare your folks.
The boy obeyed, and he and Jason walked out of the alley, leaving a cowed Matt McDonald behind.
Back home, Jedediah has his hands full with an adversary smaller in stature, but no less formidable. Jason's kid sister, Jenny.
But I want to come. I am coming.
Jenny, I'll have no more of this. I told you, you're only 15 and it's a long, hard trip.
I know how old I am, Papa, and I know it's hard. But the boys got to go when they were only 12. And don't say that they were boys.
Honey, they were boys. It makes a difference. You're just a young thing, learning to cook and bake and sew like your mama. Someday you'll want to keep house for your man, and you'll want to keep it in a civilized place, not out on the wild prairie. Boys don't grow on trees out there.
Papa, I'll be safe. After all, you and Jason will be there. Why, I could get shot by a bandit or kidnapped into a house of degradation right here in Kansas City.
What about school?
Oh, radishes, Papa. I spoke with Miss Morton, and she says I can help her. I've already got my 8th grade certification, as if you didn't know.
All right, Jenny, you wore me down. You can go along, I reckon, but you'll have to do your share just like anybody else. You'll walk behind the wagon, do the cooking, and help with the livestock. You'll have to learn to reload in case there's trouble, you know.
I'd rather you taught me how to shoot.
Don't press your luck, daughter.
Finally, Jedediah Fury and his hardy group of pioneers hit the trail for California. The overland journey is seldom smooth. There are river crossings, busted axles, blisters, and bad weather to deal with, not to mention the usual dust-ups that occur when a big group of folks from different backgrounds try to get along together. But none of that seems important when a real crisis hits the wagon train.
Jason saw their attackers now, and too clearly. They came boiling down the hillside in full battle regalia, with very serious looks on their painted faces. He rolled up his rifle and drew a bead on one of the front riders. And missed. This time, his slug hit home. By now, the suddenly formed camp was in a panic. Some of the men were doing as Jedediah had instructed back in Missouri, firing while their wives or kids reloaded. Others, including Roman, were simply frozen.
Shoot, you idiot! You know what a Comanche will do to you if they get in here? They'll tie you to a wagon wheel, cut a hole in your belly, string your guts out while you watch, and let the pigs eat them while you're still living.
Abigail fainted. Rome went to work with his gun. Jason just kept on firing. He fired, in fact, until he ran himself out of ammunition and had to make a run across the circle to the ordnance wagon. On his way, he dodged confused cattle and spooked horses, jumped over a dog, snatched up a wandering milcher kid, and took a stray arrow just above his left elbow. He handed over the milcher's spawn, then reached across his body and broke the arrow off. It was bleeding like a butchered hog, but he didn't have time for it now. His father was at the ordnance wagon and tossed him down a box of the right ammo for his rifle. His eye flicked to Jason's arm.
It's all right, Pa. Watch yourself.
And then he headed back across. Jedediah had located Milt Billings, the only man of them who spoke any of the Comanche's lingo. Milt was emptying his handgun into the swarm at the time, so Jedediah waited until they stopped to reload.
Milt! Can you talk to these Indians? Tell them we'll give them cattle.
But Milt, concentrating on loading his gun, simply shook his head.
No way these boys are gonna settle for anything but the whole herd. Goats, pigs, and all. And the girls.
Jedediah's blood ran momentarily cold. Why had he let Milcher and McDonald talk him into this bloody brute anyway? And then he felt a sharp pain in his side.
What?
He tumbled backward. Suddenly, he couldn't see very well, which was strange because he'd always had eyes like an eagle. Maybe it was later in the day than he thought. Maybe it was getting dark. That was good, wasn't it? The Comanche would break off their attack come nightfall.
Mr. Fury! Somebody get Dr. Morelli! Dear God, Fury's down!
Then, he heard no more.
With the death of Jedediah Fury, responsibility for the wagon train and all of the surviving people falls on the shoulders of young Jason. On top of the loss of life and property, some of the women, including Jason's sister Jenny, have been carried off by the Comanches. When the dead have been buried and the wounded seen to, Jason organizes a rescue mission, only to find himself in need of a rescue. In a strange turn of events, ever-resourceful Jason, with help from his friends, wins the stolen women and stock back from the Indians by rolling dice for them. The women and their rescuers return to the wagons, and battered but not defeated, the pioneers take to the trail again. Day after day, Matt McDonald and his blustering father Hamish continue to be a thorn in Jason's side.
The trail, which had become frequently used enough to show ruts, split into a Y in the foothills. And about 6 feet from that very spot, Hamish McDonald and Jason were having a difference of opinion.
I say we go up, right over the mountain. We'll save time.
It'll take us over the foothills, all right, but it's tricky. We're bound to lose some wagons, maybe people. I won't chance it, Hamish.
You're loony, lad. Look how deep those ruts are. It looks to me as if more than half the travelers that have passed this way have taken that route.
We're taking the low road, Hamish. Around the foothills, not through them. You can do as you damn well please. I'm sick and tired of fighting with you. All right, everybody, follow me!
And then he just rode off and left Hamish sitting on his horse in their path. He didn't look back for quite some time, being content to ease along the trail followed by the wagons. But when he did glance up, he caught sight of something that made his stomach turn over. Hamish MacDonald's wagon, driven by Hamish himself, with Matthew up front on horseback. It didn't make him ill that Hamish wanted to chance killing himself, and it certainly didn't bother him that Matthew was up there. But Megan. Had Megan followed her father and taken the mountain trail? Was she in that wagon? Leaving Ward to lead the caravan, he galloped back to his own rig, only to find Jenny deep in conversation with Megan.
Megan, you didn't go with your father and brother.
They're crazy. I told them that if I couldn't stop them from killing themselves, I could at least save myself. They won't get killed, will they? I mean, not really.
They had a big fight over it, Jason.
You got to stop them, Jason. I know they're both bullheaded, but I mean, I was only trying.
Before Jason realized it, he had leapt from Cleo's back to the wagon seat and taken Megan into his arms. Jenny, sitting just beyond Megan, arched her brows, glancing heavenward.
Megan, it's too late. Megan, I didn't mean... What I meant to say was that it's too late for them to turn their rig around. They'd have to back the Conestoga down that narrow trail, and that's a lot more dangerous than just going on ahead. They'll be fine up there if they're careful.
Really?
Megan's eyes, cheeks, and nose were reddened with weeping and moist with tears, and for some reason, he couldn't help thinking that she'd never looked more beautiful. He couldn't help himself. He kissed her.
Jason!
Blinking rapidly, he pulled away. Megan's face was filled with questions, Jenny's with outright shock and surprise. He felt heat shoot up his neck and fill his cheeks. He scooted away to the very edge of the bench, then dropped down and off the wagon. It was a miracle he landed on his feet, he was shaking so hard. The big wheels rolled on by him. Megan's head appeared briefly, peeking around the edge of the canvas roof. And then somebody jerked her back. Undoubtedly, Jenny. He summoned Cleo, and the Palomino came trotting up. He remounted, wondering why just kissing a girl would have such an effect on him. But this was no Washington soil dove or Kansas City whore. This was the girl he was going to marry.
Mary? Where'd that come from?
The next day, everyone learns once and for all that Jason took the right trail and Hamish the wrong one.
Olympia Morelli, mere days away from giving birth, had just climbed down from the wagon to stretch her legs. She saw it first. Dr. Morelli saw where she was looking.
No! Whoa! Whoa!
He immediately hauled back hard on the team's reins.
Look out! Look out!
Morelli leapt down to see Olympia. She stood about 20 feet away from the wagon, hands over her mouth. Other women took up the cry as Conestogas hastily pulled out of line to avoid the hail of wagon parts and tumbling livestock and broken furniture and stray rock that came down the mountainside like so much confetti thrown by a careless giant. The scraped and twisted corpse of Hamish MacDonald rolled and bumped to a halt against the off-lead horse of Salmon Kendall's wagon.
Whoa! Easy!
Dodging flying chunks of wagon, Morelli left his wife and ran to the body. There was nothing that could be done. Hamish's face was pulp He no longer breathed.
Look out!
Salmon Kinder grabbed him by the arm and yanked an instant before part of a wheel landed on the corpse.
Thank you, Salmon!
Salmon pulled him farther toward the back of the wagon, around it, and then off the trail. Olympia was still there, although she wasn't standing any longer. She was on the ground. He ran toward her.
Olympia!
I'm sorry, Michael. My water broke.
Come on.
As the last of the debris thudded and skittered down upon them, he helped her to her feet and to their wagon, where their children waited, huddled and afraid. Matt peered down the mountainside. Everything that was his and Megan's in this world, including their father, was gone. To him, the wagon had simply disappeared after its outside wheels slipped off the trail. Roughly, he wiped at his face, but he was still shaking from the shock, his burning eyes still brimming from the loss. He swung down off his horse, but his legs didn't hold him up. He sat down on the trail, just where his boots landed, and began to sob.
It's that damn Jason Fury's fault!
Stunned by the tragedy, the group buries the battered remains of Hamish MacDonald and strikes out again. In the streets of Santa Fe, Jason finds Matt waiting for him. Despite the efforts of others to talk him out of it, Matt is set on killing Jason. Nevertheless, he rejoins the wagon train, and loaded with fresh supplies, they set out again toward the Arizona Territory. On the other side of Tucson, after busting Matt out of jail, the train enters the barren plain of El Despoblado. Much to Jason's exasperation, folks start making noises about stopping in this wasteland and starting a town. Nothing Jason says can change their minds. They've already bought land in California? Well, they can get their money back. The Apache might attack? Engines haven't been seen in weeks. The creeks dry up in summer? They could dig a well. When everyone votes to name the new town Fury, after Jason's father, he relents. He'll stay long enough to help them get started, then finally follow his heart's desire and head for San Francisco. But affairs of the heart are never that easy.
Jason? You're really going then? Jenny told me, but I didn't want to believe her. I thought you'd stay until the whole town was built anyway.
You got a good enough start on everything. And you know towns. It'll never be finished.
Jason.
Jason kissed Megan. He kissed her hard and long, knowing that he might never be allowed this privilege again. And then, abruptly, he let go of her, leaving her swaying, and mounted his mare. His throat was so thick that he had no words to say goodbye. He simply nodded, his heart full, then rode away.
Ever since Jason left Missouri, it seemed that fate had no respect whatsoever for his plans. Just a few miles outside of Fury, he spots a dust cloud on the horizon. Just as he predicted, the Apaches are attacking. He turns and rides hell for leather back the way he came. When he arrives, the town is already under siege, and the defenders outnumbered.
Jason scuttled down the street. Somebody had seen him. 3 Apache arrows buried themselves in the dirt at his feet. He pulled his gun and fired back, although he didn't know exactly who to fire at. Jason shot 2 braves that were hacking at the roof of Milter's new church. He didn't know who shot the other one, but all 3 tumbled to the ground like rag dolls. He was rewarded for this by an Apache arrow that sank into his thigh. All he could do for the time being was break off the shaft. Some of the Apaches had guns, but as far as he could tell, they didn't have any repeaters. Yet. Limping, he slid around the corner of the building into an alley and across it to peek around the corner of the wagon parked at its side. Savages were swarming over the buildings now. He knew he'd never get any ammunition through to his people. And then he suddenly remembered that Salmon Kendall had an old rifle, one that took powder and ball. And in that sack, he'd put balls and powder for Salmon. He had an idea. It was dangerous, and it might not work at all, but it was all he had at the moment. He ducked back into the shadows of the wagon's undercarriage and quickly unraveled 3 burlap strings from the bag, which he proceeded to braid together, just as he had braided his sister's hair when she was younger. He affixed one end of the braid to the bag and then pulled out the small keg of powder, the smallest one he'd been able to find in the ammo wagon. He opened it and shook half its contents out over everything else in the sack, and also over the length of his makeshift fuse. He reclosed the half-full keg and stuck it back inside the bag, then lit the fuse. In the second it took to throw the bomb, he took another arrow to the shoulder.
What am I? Pincushion?
He jumped back into the shadow of the wagon again and waited. Nothing happened. Damn it! Either the quickness of the throw had blown out the fuse, or the concussion when it hit had knocked the fuse free of the sack. Either way, his makeshift bomb hadn't gone off. He crawled underneath the wagon, and on his belly, he took aim.
Take cover, man!
The bag exploded in a thick haze of black smoke, and bullets zinged every which way. Since the Indians were out in the open, it did them by far the most damage. Bodies fell right and left, scattered in piles like autumn leaves, and the wood over Jason's head was splintered by 3 wild slugs. Fortunately, most of the townsmen had heard and heeded his warning and jumped back inside what few buildings there were. He still heard shots being fired inside the buildings. Blood flowed in a river from Jason's leg. He felt weak, and with the last of his strength, he attempted to tie off the leg with his bandana. That was the last thing he remembered anyway, trying to put the bandana around his thigh, and it being incredibly difficult.
Jason awakens hours later with Jenny at his side. His wounds are patched up, most of the buildings in Fury are still standing, and only 2 townspeople are dead and a few injured. His hastily rigged bomb has saved the day, but the folks of Fury have a mighty strange way of showing their gratitude.
The door opened, and instead of Megan, there stood a contingent of townspeople, Salmon Kendall in the lead. Megan followed, her arms full of bedding. The other members of his party followed suit as they filed in.
We've had us a meeting.
What sort of meeting?
Well, first off, we want to thank you for some mighty fast thinking this afternoon. We thought you'd gone off to California.
I came back.
And why'd you do that?
I saw the dust cloud. Didn't know if it was another Marshal or Apache, but didn't figure it was worth taking the chance.
You see? Loyal he is.
And brave.
Salmon, you heard me say it. Jason Fury would not let us down.
I heard.
Isn't our town named for his papa? Is not Fury a name to be reckoned with in the West?
Get to the point, Salmon.
And he sees to the heart of the matter.
The point is, Jason, we had us a little meeting, and we elected you Sheriff of Fury.
You did what?
For a term of 2 years, effective immediately.
God bless you, son.
I won't do it.
I believe you will.
Why?
Because you can't quit unless the mayor accepts your resignation.
And I'm the mayor. I believe our own Sheriff Fury needs his rest now, folks. Shall we let him have it, or should we stay and argue some more about things that can't be changed?
The crowd began to funnel out through the door. Jason closed his eyes in resignation.
Oh, crud.
The life and times of Sheriff Jason Fury and his friends and adversaries continues in a town called Fury Book 2, Hard Country. Besides the usual trials and tribulations of an up-and-coming western settlement, Jason must deal with a potential range war, meddlesome gunslingers, and a stiff-necked army lieutenant. When ruthless Mexican banditos attack Fury and kidnap some of its citizens, Jason forms an unlikely partnership with Matt McDonald to launch a rescue mission across the border. In Book 3, Judgment Day, the citizens of Fury fight for their lives against the repeated attacks of Apache war chief Lone Wolf and his renegade army. Will the town survive? Will Jenny stay with Matt? Will Jason finally go off to San Francisco and leave Megan brokenhearted? Don't miss the action and romance, the trials and the triumphs of Jason Fury and all the other folks in A Town Called Fury in rip-roaring graphic audio.